guys, welcome to yet another episode of Creative Connects Behind the Arts, a series of heart-to-heart conversations we've had with African artists on their creative journeys. Today we're joined by Makin, a Cape Town-based Botswana artist and Masters of Fine Arts student at the University of Cape Town. Kim is also the co-founder of the Botswana Pavillion, a creative hub she started alongside other Botswana creative artists in Cape Town for creatives in Botswana. In this interview, Kim shares her inspiration behind the Botswana Pavillion and explores the idea of Botswana's national creative identity and what that means for other Botswana creatives. Stay tuned for our interview with her.
Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I'm trying to describe myself as summarized as possible because I feel like I do a lot of different things. But the way that I would describe myself is as an artist, first and foremost, from Botswana. I'm practicing in Cape Town. I'm currently based here, though I am from Gaborone. I would describe myself as a radio host as well, though I'm not currently working on radio. It's a lockdown. But I am a Master of Fine Arts student as well.
What influenced your decision to change over to the course?
I initially was studying a general Bachelor of Arts in film and media and art history. I wasn't really enjoying the course because I didn't really feel like I was being challenged, or creatively challenged in the way that I wanted to be. Obviously, it's like theory based. So I was engaging with a lot of art through the art history course that I was taking, but I wasn't necessarily being able to creatively challenge myself in the same way. What the art history course exposed me to, though, was the presence of an art world, an art industry, and one that was working very well with established artists speaking to us and telling us about the projects that they had done over the years in biennales in different countries in the world. And for me, that was inspiring because it was the first time I was really able to engage with an established art industry and think like, oh, actually, this doesn't actually have to be a hobby or something I can do on the side, but it can actually be something that I make money from. Like it's my daily bread. It's not just, if I have time after work, I'll make a pretty picture.
So now I would like to know why it is you chose University of Cape Town. What influenced that decision?
I didn't actually want to come to UCT at first. It was my dad kind of pushing me to just apply this side. Once I got here, I started off with the first degree, and then I kind of enjoyed UCT because it was sort of like far away enough from home, but still close enough for me to like touch base or come home if I need to. So it felt comfortable in that sense because it wasn't too unfamiliar to me.
How has tertiary fine arts education impacted or influenced your artistic process and the output?
By providing me with access to knowledge and resources, theory, that I don't think I necessarily would have otherwise. I think that's the interesting thing about the institution. It might be a good or bad thing depending on whether you're actually part of an institution or not, because you get access to like academic journals that you wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise. And I think I really appreciated that sort of access to the archive historically. And that's something that's played into my work because then my concepts become to an extent connected to like socio-political history. It's what informs my concepts, and then I develop it further by exploring it practically. My last couple of years of secondary school, then we had no sort of art history or art theoretical base. It wasn't actually part of the course at all. So by the time I got here, I was like, wow, you can do a whole degree in art history. Like I didn't even, like the most I knew at the time was maybe like Andy Warhol and pop art. I remember writing an essay about him. So it wasn't really that extensive. And I think being introduced to art in a theoretical or like established tertiary institution, it made me feel like, oh, actually there's a whole world behind this that I was able to access through the institution.
So could you highlight a few advantages or positive aspects as well as challenges or drawbacks of being a foreign student in South Africa?
To an extent, you are open-minded or bring like an international perspective. I know that South Africa is a very diverse country, but I think it is interesting to have like input in South Africa from Africa, but also within the region, like within Southern Africa, and seeing where we are different and we're the same. I think that because like South Africa has sort of like a hegemony in the region, we have a lot to offer in terms of like our international perspectives.
How welcome was that perspective?
Yeah, and I suppose that brings me to what the disadvantages are of being a foreign student in South Africa. It's that you do feel that you are different. I spoke about the diversity of South Africa to an extent, and I think coming into UCT, which is like celebrated as the best institution in Africa, I think I came in with a misconception that like, oh, you know, it's going to be so diverse. I'm going to meet so many different kinds of people, and ended up like mostly meeting a diverse group of South Africans. So in a way, I was very aware of my difference in that like my upbringing is completely different. My socio-political ideas are completely different because I grew up in a completely different context. And so I found myself to an extent having to battle with like the ideas on this side, especially studying an arts degree. Everything you are engaging with, even daily in your academics, is to an extent like sociopolitically or historically related, because you're looking at like we just spoke about theory and access to the archives and history. So I would say that one of the disadvantages is feeling different, but I think that there is potential in that. Like I'm trying to see the silver lining. As visual artists, you're constantly referring back to like symbols or like icons, like the way you represent certain ideas. So the way that I represent something based on my context and based on my upbringing might not be relatable for someone else who has like a completely different idea of it or a completely different upbringing or context. So in a way there was that challenge, because something that might seem so obvious to me, someone else would be like, okay, but what does this print mean? Like, you know, I'd say that the city of Cape Town, or being in this space in general, has impacted or influenced my practice to an extent, again, by that access to the international art world through Cape Town. I think within this space, I'm speaking specifically to contemporary art galleries, international art fairs, as well as an extensive art history and extensive museum collections of contemporary and modern art.
Could you break it down a little bit more for people who might not have had the opportunity or need something to anchor what you mean by? So if you have access to say a museum, why is that museum and what it carries so important?
Yeah, so I'll compare directly my experience of the art scene in Cape Town to what I've experienced in like Gaborone, Botswana. So as far as the art scene in Botswana goes, in terms of art spaces, obviously the biggest one is going to be the art gallery at the Botswana National Museum and Art Gallery. That's probably my first point of reference. Besides for Tapong Visual Arts Center, and then we don't really have any contemporary art galleries. There was the Sophie Lalonde Art Gallery that was in the Eye Towers, but then she left. And so in terms of contemporary art spaces, there isn't really a contemporary art gallery that you can walk into on any given day of the week. So that's one thing I've definitely appreciated about my experiences of Cape Town, because there are a lot of contemporary art galleries that you can go to almost any day of the week, and they are exhibiting different artists. Like regularly they exhibiting contemporary art that, you know, has a whole discourse behind it. It has a history. It's positioned within the framework of like an international art thing, and that again presents itself in instances like Cape Town Art Fair, where galleries from around Cape Town, around South Africa, around the world all come and present the work by their different artists in different booths. And then obviously there's different after parties. You can interact with the different artists like personally, or they're walking around during the art fair. So I really feel like that there's a deeper sense of critical engagement with the creative industry here, where in Botswana, I would say it's more on like a national level, where the only place that you can really engage with like an established fine art industry is through the National Gallery. And I think that there is great potential in like more contemporary spaces where we can think and rethink art as we know it.
Did you feel as if you had to leave home in order to achieve what you needed to do as an artist and what you needed to learn?
Yeah, I definitely did feel like I had to leave home, but I suppose that goes down to an institutional level, for example, because there's no space for me to really pursue a tertiary fine art degree, more Botswana. I have to leave in order to pursue it at an institution. So to an extent, I suppose personally, I did feel displaced because I did not have the option to do this at home. In 2019, we brought home the Botswana Pavillion Subjective Nationhood at the Botswana National Art Gallery. The title is to an extent twofold. So there's the Botswana Pavillion, and that kind of has to do more with like the membership and the network of artists that we're bringing together. And then there's the subjective nationhood part. So to explain the Botswana Pavillion, it started as a group of Botswana artists who were all studying at UCT, at the Michaela School of Fine Arts. And we found that in our own individual art practices, we were to an extent exploring aspects of our nationhood, exploring our sociocultural setting visually through our art. And so we decided to come together for the first time in May, June 2019, and we put on an exhibition together at Gallery Momo in Cape Town, which we called the Botswana Pavillion. It was called the Botswana Pavillion No Return. And at the time, we decided to go with the Botswana Pavillion because our exhibition coincided with the Venice Biennale, which was last year. It took place from May to November of 2019. It's a huge art fair, basically like the Art World Olympics. And within the Venice Biennale, there are national pavilions. Last year they represented, I think, 89 different countries. South Africa is included, Zimbabwe is included. As far as I know, those are the only two countries from Southern Africa that had national pavilions showcasing at the Venice Biennale. And so with the very first exhibition in May, June, to an extent dwelling on aspects of our identity as displaced Botswana in Cape Town, we decided to sort of play around with the idea of a national pavilion for Botswana and to an extent what that looks like. So that was the first thing. We decided to kind of continue the metaphor because we understood that to an extent as a nation, we still need to really define and articulate what our creative national identity looks like. So we decided to bring this conversation home because as much as we can have this conversation as Botswana outside of the country, it's important for us to actually have the context at home, not to say that we are striving for an international fine art industry, but instead to say, what does a Botswana specific fine art industry look like? And so we extended this conversation into the context of the National Gallery at home. With respect to subjective nationhood, it was actually specifically a phrase that was included in a review of the first show by Art Throb in Cape Town. Kanya Mashabila wrote a review for our first exhibition, and she referred to sort of the theme as us exploring our subjective realities as Botswana. And so we decided to take that specifically and explore that further as a theme, because I think to an extent, the idea is that it'll help us create a conversation around what a national creative identity looks like. And so each of our exhibitions are sort of like an ongoing conversation in order to, you know, hopefully finally contribute to the development of the creative industry in Botswana. Big challenge that we have against us as like Botswana artists, that generally Botswana are conservative. Whereas, for example, art in the way that I've experienced it in a South African context is to an extent political, or speaks back to your sociocultural context. So in a way, in terms of like developing creative industries in Botswana, it's a challenge because people are not necessarily engaging with art critically in a way that we are taught to academically outside of the country. So really, there is a huge gap in terms of like how Botswana at the moment are engaging with art, I'll say like on a national level to an extent, as, you know, we haven't really been given a space to investigate art past like visually this looks nice, visually, you know, there isn't really a greater conversation about engaging with work on a conceptual, intellectual level. So I think work needs to be done there, and that could potentially like develop our creative industry or the way that we interact with it, because I don't really think that the art industry as it is now really even supports someone pursuing a career in art past secondary school. So I really do feel like the emphasis is on like the institutional spaces and education to an extent. It's important to, from a young age, really put yourself out there. I think that as much as like in this conversation, I've emphasized the importance of an art education, I do also think that experience is so important. And, you know, really because, I guess because fine art, like, as, you know, as like, if I'm thinking about it in the context of UCT, the fine art department falls within humanities. And I think that fine art is really a conversation. It's a visual conversation. So I think that relating to others is so important, because at the end of the day, your art doesn't exist in isolation. It's always going to be in conversation with the people that view it as much as it is in conversation with you. So I think that speaking to people about your ideas, sharing your ideas, trying your ideas out and seeing how people respond to it, what the feedback is, and really just working from there. Like I said, we work on a project by project basis. So I think it really just means trying something new, putting yourself out there, seeing what you liked, what you didn't like, what people liked and didn't like, and then try again.
Thank you so much, Kim.